Thank you for joining us here on Vital for Colorado Radio, part of the Connect and Collaborate Network. I'm your on-air producer and serving as host today, Jon Ekstrom, filling in for Peter Moore. Our chairman and CEO is traveling, so he is unable to join us today. I will do my best to do right in his stead. Our guest today is Colorado Springs City Council member representing District 6, Andy Pico. Andy, it's a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So today we're going to talk about, we spend a lot of time talking about the northern part of the state. We talk about Metro Denver, we talk about Weld County, because that's where a lot of oil and gas activity is, and Vital for Colorado is an 85,000 member plus coalition of business interests in the business community, all dedicated to advancing oil and gas interests. There's not a ton of activity going on in Colorado Springs, but that's not to say that the issues that energy impacts are not pertinent to the area. So, Councilman Pico, before we get into the issues, I would love for you to give us a little bit of a snapshot of your background, where you come from. You have an extensive and very impressive military background, so before we even do that, I'd just like to say thank you for your service, sir.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much.
So tell us a little bit. You had 21 years of active duty. Can you give us a little bit of insight into sort of what you did, what branch of the military you served, and some of the work that you did?
Certainly. I am a retired naval flight officer. So I went on active duty in 1973 during the latter part of the Vietnam conflict. I went into naval flight training and flew the E-2 Hawkeye, which is known as Carrier Airborne Early Warning, and that provides putting a big radar up on top of an aircraft at 25,000 feet and extending radar horizon for the task force. And I did intercept control and surveillance and that kind of stuff.
Wow.
I also spent one tour in flying the Airborne Command Post, which was the E-4B is a converted 747, crammed full of very highly sophisticated command and control communications and so forth, and we flew in direct support of the president. So when President Reagan went someplace, we were someplace close by, linked. The two aircraft were linked, and I provided his emergency communication support.
Wow.
So I did that for several years. And then went to out to the 6th Fleet Staff, which was aboard the flagship in the Mediterranean. And so I was the anti-air warfare officer, so kind of coordinating that sort of activity for the Mediterranean area for U.S. naval forces, as well as we had a NATO hat under what was called Strike Force South. And I came from there and came to Cheyenne Mountain. And so they dropped me into Cheyenne Mountain during Operation Desert Storm. So I did combat missile warning, and then several years after that, during the fall of the Soviet Union and so forth. That was a period of time that I was in there. So a bit varied, went in a couple of different places. And along the way, dropped in at the Naval War College in Newport for a year in residence. And during that time, I picked up a couple of master's degrees, one in National Security Affairs and then one from a civilian university out in town and international relations.
I really like the way that you say, I picked up a couple of master's degrees, the same way someone would say, I picked up golf or I picked up racquetball. That is remarkable.
Yeah, there was a lot of study, yeah.
Well, I mean, you certainly have no trouble keeping yourself busy here, because following your time working in the military, you became a defense contractor. What was your experience there, or was that part of what you already outlined?
No. So when I retired, I went out for about a year trying to set up my own business, which was at that time looking into wireless television and communications. That wasn't quite coming through, meeting expectations, and the people here in Colorado Springs in the defense community tracked me down. And because I had been up in Cheyenne Mountain, I'd done air defense and air warning, I did missile warning, I've done space surveillance, all that part of Cheyenne Mountain, and nuclear command and control. Wow. So I had experience in a whole range of things that they needed someone to come in and help write requirements. And that's what I did. So I came back to Colorado Springs, jumped into a defense company in the local area and did that, working for Air Force Space Command. And under that contract, ended up working back in the NORAD to implement the programs that we had designed and put together. So part of a pretty large group of people updating NORAD's command and control systems for air, space, and missile warning. And so that put me back into the NORAD operations, which is essentially in the same area that I had worked when I was on active duty. So I like to combine the time on active duty and as a defense contractor working in the building for them. About 15 years total working for NORAD.
Wow.
Which included 9/11.
Wow. Oh, you were at NORAD during 9/11. What was that experience like?
Well, I was not in the mountain or on the scope. I was actually up and I was doing as part of the developing requirements and developing the program to replace the air warning system. I was during the attacks. I was off site at a meeting, and the meeting didn't quite go as scheduled.
I'll bet not.
As you may imagine. And from that point on, my task shifted significantly to fixing the command and control shortfalls, and that's what I did for until I left NORAD, which was about 2009. At that point, I left and went to stayed within the company and just picked up a different task, working some space surveillance stuff until that ran out, which was about the time and I ran for office.
Wow. That is a remarkable career, sir. If we can go back just a little bit, what compelled you to military service?
Well, I'd always been interested in it, but I went to pick up my degree first, and while I was there during the Vietnam War, the draft numbers came out, and it kind of compelled me to take a serious look because the numbers said I wasn't going to be on the first bus, but I might be on the third or the fourth. So it kind of focuses your attention a little bit. And I said, I was kind of interested anyway, so I picked what I wanted to do. And I initially joined Air Force ROTC, went through that program, but then as I was coming up, the Vietnam War was winding down, the Air Force was winding down the requirements, but the Navy had managed their numbers a little bit better. So they had openings, and they invited me to come fly. And I said, that's a heck of a good idea. So I went through carrier planes.
Wow. Do you get to fly anymore? Have you been up recently?
No, not recently. I would love to do that, but it's just one of those things that didn't quite work out. The money wasn't quite there, and I've ended up flying a desk for a long time. I've been involved, of course, working on NORAD in a lot of air defense stuff. So that experience definitely was applicable. But I was a naval flight officer, which is the back seat, and my job as a controller was to get planes together.
Understood.
And there's not a lot of call for that in civilian life. So I just did a different track. I do have a commercial pilot's license, multi-engine. I have an instructor's license, instrument rated, and so forth. But I have not flown an aircraft, actually, for a very long time. Now, I did get a chance to go fly with the Air Force Academy in their training aircraft because as part of my job here on the city council, we've gotten a fair number of calls from people who don't like aircraft noise overhead.
Uh-huh.
So I went up and flew with them and flew in their aircraft, fly the patterns and the stuff that they talked to, so we could kind of see for ourselves firsthand what the Air Force Academy is doing to minimize noise impact and stay within the limits that they have and still get the job done. So I did get a chance to go fly. They wouldn't let me touch controls, but I did get a chance to go fly.
But you know what?
And it was fun.
You were up there, and that's what counts. So it's fascinating to me because you touched on the Vietnam War. You mentioned Operation Desert Storm. You talked about the fall of the Soviet Union, and you mentioned 9/11. So given this scope of your career, What do you see as the role of the military in 2018, and how is that different from, how has that evolved in your estimation, or has it during your time?
Well, the details have changed a little bit, but fundamentally, it's in defense of the nation, defense, of our national security interests, which includes our own interests of our allies that we're linked with, and ensuring that we maintain safety of our people, safety of commerce, maintain the sea lanes open. As a Navy guy, the security of the sea lanes is kind of one of the fundamental issues of the Navy, and that involves commerce, maritime trade, freedom of navigation across seas, and those things have not really changed. The details have changed. Some of the potential opponents have shifted a bit, so that is different. We have had, from the time that I first came into active duty, we were concerned about terrorism, and that has evolved quite a bit, where instead of being a problem, it became a major source of conflict.
Certainly.
And that actually started before 9/11, but we didn't really fully recognize that someone was at war with us until they succeeded in 9/11. And since then, we've been at war probably, I'd say we've been at war for 28 years or 17 years, depending on which events you want to count.
Right.
And it's been essentially nonstop.
Wow.
So our military has been at war, although the country not necessarily has been. But we still have that requirement. I mean, our focus is now working on trying to stamp out non-state actors, meaning ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and those kinds of groups, and at the same time, readiness to stand against state aggression, wherever that may be, whether it's in the Western Pacific or in Europe.
I think that's interesting too, because the latter point you just touched on is probably the most visible part for a civilian who has not served. My father did serve in the Army, but as a civilian who has not served, you see the ISIS part, you see the Al Qaeda part. That's what gets covered in the news. But the work of the military, I was interested in ensuring commerce and ensuring the sea lanes are open. There's a lot that goes into it that provides value that I don't think people either understand or appreciate or perhaps are even aware of. Is that fair to characterize it that way?
I think that is. I mean, most people don't realize how many military people are on duty at all the time, and it's across a wide spectrum, whether it's the ships at sea, whether it's the NORAD guys watching the skies. The NORAD is still on watch and always will be, and it's right out of here in Cheyenne Mountain, and as well as Peterson Air Force Base.
Right.
And we've got those people on duty all the time, around the clock. And same thing at sea. Ships are forward deployed and up close, and you've got Army units, Air Force units flying the borders of freedom, if I can coin a phrase. And that has not changed, and I don't think that's going to change. Ever will. Because as soon as we let down our guard, you see what happens. When we withdrew the forces out of Iraq before the place was really stable, that provided the avenue for ISIS to evolve out of the remnants of Al Qaeda, and we had a bigger problem, and we've had as a result a major war that has been nonstop in the region. So we've got regions that will always be unstable, and we'll always have a need to try to provide some kind of stability to try to maintain at least some semblance of peace and try to keep complete warfare from breaking out.
Understood.
So it's a never-ending thing. It is never. While the details have evolved, the fundamentals have not really changed.
That's an extraordinarily interesting take, Councilman. Speaking of geopolitical issues, pertinent to Vital, and one thing we've discovered over the course of doing this show is that energy is both local, it's state level, it's national level, and it's international. The things that we do here, the wells drilled in the DJ Basin, have a ripple effect throughout our economy, throughout our world, throughout our geopolitical situation. Can we talk just a little bit about, last year you wrote an op-ed that appeared in the Colorado Springs Gazette, that was in August of 2017, about sort of the geopolitics of energy. Would you care to revisit that with me a little bit?
Sure. The the energy economy is international. I mean, it just goes across borders, and what affects one area, affects everybody, because the price of oil or natural gas or energy in general or coal or whatever it is you're working with is affected in a global market. So when you've got someone able to restrict energy in one place, it will drive up prices for everybody. And the modern economy, regardless of what people want to say, runs on energy.
It does.
It really does. And that goes back into, defense is trying to ensure national security, which includes the economy that runs it, as well as a whole lot of other stuff. So it's energy politics drives an awful lot across the world. Right now, for a perfect example, just this last couple of weeks, President Trump went over there and talked with NATO, and one of the things he mentioned was how much natural gas Russia sells to Europe.
Right.
And it is a major issue that drives politics in that region is energy production, because Russia has an awful lot of natural gas. Europe is heavily dependent upon that. We, the United States, are generating a lot more natural gas. We're getting to the point where we're able to export that. That provides a couple things. For one, it gives the option to other countries to buy from us instead of Russia. But also the fact that we put that out there drives the price of natural gas down, which reduces the cash reserves, the cash income that goes into Russia that fuels their expansionist policies. So it's all interlinked. You can't separate oil from national security. And when I say oil, I mean energy, all forms.
Yeah.
Right now, we're generating a lot more oil. We're generating a lot more natural gas. We are now becoming an export instead of an importing country, and we're able to replace a lot of the sources. But we have to be able to get it there. And that impacts significantly the politics in Europe and in Central Asia.
It does, 100%. And looking back at, there's a quote from this op-ed that says the OPEC cartel led by Saudi Arabia has historically had a stranglehold on the global oil market. By cutting our energy imports and starting to export U.S. oil and natural gas, we are breaking the grip of Russia and OPEC, giving our allies new diplomatic leverage. I will take that a step further in thinking back to 2005, and I believe it was the State of the Union address, when the U.S. imported something like 2/3 of the oil that we consumed, and George W. Bush very famously said, "We are addicted to foreign oil." Well, we are less than 15 years later, and that equation has flipped. So the implications for the United States are remarkable, given that $200 billion is no longer going abroad and staying here and providing robust growth to our economy. But now that is starting to translate into exactly what you had articulated, which is our allies can lean on us and not necessarily be beholden to Russia, where you saw what they did in Georgia. You've seen in Estonia, in Poland. Russia really has an iron grip on some of those energy markets, and if you control energy, you control the way people live their lives on a very fundamental level.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. One of the first things when in a conflict between countries, and if someone can cut off the other guy's energy, that's one of the first things they do. That's one of your first targets is energy, and able to blockade them or strangle them. So the more that Russia is able to keep people on their leash, the more influence they have in various things that happen. And you can see that play out in Ukraine as well, and in that particular region, in Crimea and so forth. The fact that they have control of the natural gas energy markets kind of tempers the response that other countries have toward Russian aggression in that region. But you see that playing out every day. And the more and more we can break that stranglehold, the more and reduce the amount of cash that Russia gets as they export, and reduce the value of what they do export, the better it is for us and the better it is for our allies.
100%. And I think the part that's missing there, I don't know that there would be many people who would disagree with you about this in terms of that assessment. But the missing part of the equation frequently is we can have an impact on that here in Colorado. And you've got a number of activists out there, some people who are, a little bit misguided in their fears about oil and gas, about fracking, and, for instance, Initiative 97, which is currently collecting signatures and trying to get on the November ballot, trying to enact a 2,500-foot setback, which would effectively lock up and end all oil and gas development in the state. Now, if you do that, not only do energy prices in Colorado go up, but you reduce the supply that is available for our allies, which can be, and I don't want to overstate this, but can be contributing to a destabilizing force in terms of geopolitics.
Oh, yes. And I really thank you for the question, because it's one of the things I feel very, very strongly about. One of the things that, the key that has enabled us to increase our production of oil, natural gas, energy, the energy equation has been the revolution in fracking. Now, fracking has been around for 60 years, but the new capability of horizontal drilling combined with that's really the key. And that has opened up vast amounts of reserves that we couldn't economically get before. That is what's really been the change. And the more that you've got activist groups, for throwing a fit over fracking, the more they are handing the ability to Russia to continue to maintain control of energy markets in Europe and to drive the equation. And it's interesting to note that some of those groups have been funded by Russian activists. Russian meddling is real and is going on in the war over fracking, and the attempt by Russia to reverse our success in reversing their stranglehold. So it's playing out on a really big thing. And an awful lot of these activists, although they don't realize it, are really just the pawns of the Russian energy oligarchy.
I don't know that I would necessarily go that far, because but you're absolutely.
I will.
Well, that's fair. I will leave that to you. But one thing that I will say is that, intentionally or not, a lot of what is driving this agenda has unintended consequences. We talk a lot on this show about unintended consequences, and if you enact policies that restrict oil and gas development, the unintended consequences are going to ripple beyond Colorado. They're going to ripple beyond the borders of the United States, and they are going to reach international levels. So,
absolutely.
We mentioned this, Colorado Springs. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Colorado is a major energy producer, particularly in natural gas, and you've got several different regions. Some of our counties are really cashing in on that. Their county budgets and municipal budgets in that area are being plussed up by the excise taxes on that, and they're doing really well. But that production is a big part of the national production, and Colorado is a big player in that market.
100%.
That's I think is one of the largest markets of our sectors, business sectors in Colorado, is energy.
Absolutely. All right, we are coming up on a quick break here. A quick plug for Vital for Colorado. Check out Vital for Colorado on the web. It's VITALFOR Colorado, all spelled out, .com. You can listen to this episode as well as all past episodes under the Learn tab. There's videos and podcasts link. You can check it out there. We have more with Andy Pico coming up here in our next segment. Be sure to stay with us. We've got lots of great things to talk about in terms of growth, in terms of utilities, and all manner of issues. Councilman, thank you for being with us, and we'll have more in the next segment. Thank you for staying with us here on Vital for Colorado Radio, part of the Connect and Collaborate Network. I am your on-air producer, Jon Ekstrom, and we are talking today with Colorado Springs City Council member Andy Pico, representing District 6. Councilman Pico, thank you for being a part of this show.
My pleasure. Enjoying it.
One thing we should touch on is we've been talking about oil and gas in our last segment, and we've been talking about the combination of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing and how that's unlocked vast reserves of oil and gas previously thought unreachable in the United States. And I personally know the answer to this, but I think for our listeners, it might be useful to understand, why isn't there more oil and gas development in Colorado Springs? It seems like a community that would be very supportive of this, especially understanding the geopolitical implications.
Well, it is something of a great deal of interest. When I first ran for office almost 5 years ago, that was one of the big questions during the campaign of opening up oil and gas development and opening up fracking. So fracking for the first half of the campaign was one of the big hot button issues. We had a company out here, and they sank a couple of wells into the basin down there, and are drilling up there. And in the middle of the campaign, they came up and said, by the way, there's no oil here, at least not commercially developable. So it needs to be seasoned about another couple 100,000 years. And so that kind of dropped that issue during the campaign trail. And that was right about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago. So they basically came up and said, there isn't anything here. It's well, there is, but it's not economically viable. And they basically shut it down and shut everything down. So there are no oil being drilled. There are no natural gas wells anywhere in El Paso County. And we still get some of the people coming up and petitioning us to block fracking in El Paso County. And we have to tell them, there isn't any. But that's just one thing. So we kind of missed out on that. I really wish there was, but it isn't here. So we in Colorado Springs have to import it.
I wouldn't say you missed it. I would say the earth missed you. Yeah. But that's the way it goes. It's interesting to me, too. This brings up another point where, in terms of north of Denver, you've got communities like Commerce City and Broomfield and Erie and, Thornton. And there's been oil and gas development in this area for the last 40 years at least. But you've got a lot of people moving into Colorado saying, I don't like this. I don't want this near my house. I don't want this in my area. And it's a typical sort of NIMBY argument. It's a not in my backyard kind of thing. But the problem with oil and gas development is you have to go where the oil and gas actually is. This is not your standard NIMBY argument where, you don't want certain things in your neighborhood. Maybe you don't want a landfill next door or a prison or a strip club or whatever it may be. In terms of oil and gas development, this is where the resources are in the earth. So considering that virtually everything that we do, every aspect of our lives is touched by this resource, I think it behooves all of us to figure out common sense solutions so that we can enjoy the quality of life that we all enjoy here in Colorado while getting the resources that we need that power that life.
Oh, that's absolutely true. And the interesting thing is that with the advent of horizontal drilling with fracking, you put one site out and it's able to take the place of 10 or 15 sites of using old technology. A lot of people are, very up in arms about fracking, but fracking has reduced the impact on the environment, not made it worse. And at the same time, able to extract that much more oil and natural gas. So it's to our benefit to do that, and essential.
Right.
And the issue that's being run here, they want to, ban it within 2,500 feet, and well, just because of where everybody is, that would block out an awful lot of the energy production that goes on in the state, because you would. It's just it is. But it's interesting that people don't have a problem with putting a wind farm in their backyard, but they have a problem with putting a gas well. And that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, what's interesting?
Our family way down in Texas actually had a little bit of a ranch for a while, and on it we had 5 or 6 natural gas wells, and they were great. We didn't have any problem with them.
Well, what's interesting to me is that in terms of the oil and gas development process, and I used to work for an oil and gas company, so I've seen this up close and personal probably somewhere between 50 and 100 times. But as you go through the process, the footprint actually shrinks. As the well gets developed, it gets smaller. And you compare that against if you want more If you want more power from the wind, you need to erect more turbines, so that footprint gets larger. If you're going back to a more traditional type of resource like coal, if you have a coal mine, you know, the footprint continues to get larger because you have to continue to move and mine more coal. In terms of oil and gas, it actually shrinks, which I don't think a lot of people understand.
That's a very good point.
So we've touched on these resources now. We've touched on wind. We've touched on natural gas. We've touched on coal. And you are on the board of the Colorado Springs Utilities, which is one of the municipal-owned utilities here in the state. You are not beholden to Excel or, you know, say Black Hills, but the people actually manage their own utility. How did that come about? Because I see, going back a little bit, your Bachelor's of Business Administration has an emphasis on transportation and public utilities, which I found interesting. Yes. So what's entailed in your role for the board of Colorado Springs Utilities?
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit here, Colorado Springs has had its own utility, and it's had four service utility for quite some time. And the voters put that in place decades ago. So the city council doubles as a utility board.
Oh, okay.
And so as we come up there, when I came on, the president of the council was also the chairman of the utility board. And likewise, you know, the number two was the number two. But we changed that, and we've restructured how we operate here in Colorado Springs, and we split those roles. We're all still on the board, and we're all still on council, but the chairman is separately elected from the president of council. So we've got four leadership positions, and I served as the chair for 2 years, as well as having been the vice chair now for a little over 2 years, both a year before I was the chairman and now a year after. And we rotate the positions every 2 years. So that's kind of how that's been. And by the way, I was also the chairman for a couple of years. I'm on the board of directors for Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, which includes transportation. So I managed to, double use my bachelor's finally.
Well played.
It was kind of a highlight. It took me 40 years to get there, but I got to use it. But and PPACG, by the way, also is interested in air quality, so we monitor the air quality. So we're watching from multiple sides what goes on and what the power plants put in the air and so forth. So a very, very strong interest in that, and that's actually why I ran to be on the board.
Interesting. So it wasn't necessarily about the council position, but more about serving on this board.
It was both, but it was more, my personal emphasis was much more on serving on the utility board and helping to make those long-term decisions about energy production, water, wastewater, and everything else. And we have a four-service utility, which is almost unique in the country. Very few public utilities have all four services in it, and we do here. So it's been a lot of fun for me.
Remind me what the four services are.
Energy, meaning electrical and natural gas,
okay,
as well as water and wastewater.
Wow. Okay. I want to say when I lived in Fort Collins, Fort Collins has a similar setup because I felt like I paid my utility to Fort Collins Light and Power. But I cannot remember. That was in college, and I was a much different person back then. So I was not as attuned to the issues and where I was paying my utility bill as I am now, given my vocation. But in your estimation, what would you say is the right mix of energy sources? And I'll couch this in a particular way because we just got through primary season here in Colorado, and all four Democratic gubernatorial candidates expressed some support for going to either 100% renewable resources or maybe 50%, but many of them did tout their 100% renewables. Given that you work on the board of a utility, what's your view on that, and what is your view of the right mix of energy resources?
I think the right view or the right mix really should be driven by the economics and the engineering that it takes to produce the energy and generate electrical power, as opposed to politicians kind of making arbitrary decisions about percentages. Because the numbers of what it costs in both long-term and what it costs in capital costs to build it, as well as to fuel it and run it and maintain all that equipment, is really what should drive how you do that. And as part of that also, I'll add in there that the reliability is essential as well. Because you want to, when you throw the switch, you want the power on.
Absolutely.
You don't want to sit there and say, oh, well, it's not due to come on for another half hour here or something.
You don't want your power equation to be hope and luck.
You're right. And I'm gonna toss in a quote here, just digress for a moment, because some other countries have gone down this renewable path in a great deal. And in England, the Minister of Electrical Energy, whatever that particular title is called, actually made this quote, and this is a direct quote: "People will have to get used to using electricity when it's available rather than when they want it," unquote. And that's nuts. That is absolutely nuts. Companies can't do that. Manufacturing companies can't do that. That's where your job would die if the company that is building stuff and employs you can't turn the power on. It's just nuts.
Well, and a startling proposition in 2018. In 2018, given that we've had reliable electricity now for centuries,
forever. About a century.
Longer than pretty much any of us has been alive. To go back to almost regress in that way, that's a very startling proposition, a very startling statement.
Yeah, but there's some huge misconceptions that some people have about the ability to put reliable energy on the grid from solar and wind. And I've used a phrase, and I'll use it now. It's a fantasy. 100% renewable is an absolute fantasy. And for those who actually understand how it works, I'd say that. Well, I'll stop there. Before I say.
Well, I think.
Or I get myself in trouble.
I think.
Have an idea where I go.
I think what you're preaching, Andy, is being pragmatic in terms of making your choices. You mentioned, given the engineering requirements and given the reliability requirements, the right mix will reveal itself. And I would say this in terms of renewables, natural gas and the fracking revolution here in the United States has emboldened wind and solar in particular, because they work hand in glove. When you have times of peak demand, you can ramp up a natural gas power plant in a matter of minutes. So if you are supported by solar and wind, and you like those sources, and you think they're right for America, you think they're right for the environment, okay, but understand that natural gas is probably backing that up. So to enact
policy... There's no probably, but it absolutely is. Let me jump in here. An awful lot of the solar fields and wind farms and so forth, they are backed up by natural gas. So we go out in the market and we look for various energy sources. And we produce most of it, but we also look for other options. And people are always sending us, hey, these guys are offering 2 cents per kilowatt hour for solar. And go, well, that's interesting. No, that's a pretty good price. But they leave out the fact, and this is key, is that 2 cents isn't firmed, number one. Number two, that's wherever that solar field is or wind farm is, doesn't include the transmission costs to get it from where they produce it to where you need it, and then into our distribution network. So by the time you start adding in all these extra stuff, when they talk about firmed power, a solar producer, may back it up or they may not. We actually contract with companies now to just give us the solar power, and we firm it ourselves. We run natural gas plants to make sure that the power stays stable, and we have it married to the input coming in from solar or wind. And we currently don't have any wind, but when we did, we would match that, so we maintain the power grid. So we know what it takes because we're the ones who are guaranteeing the power, and that's kind of one of the key is that the solar panels don't run all the time. They're not lunar panels, so when it's dark out, there's no power.
Right.
And now wind kind of runs around the clock, but not reliable. And there's an awful lot of times, a cold, dark, windless night, you're going to freeze if you don't have a natural gas plant or a coal plant powering the grid. And that's kind of the key. Now, a lot of people are touting that energy storage will make that viable. Well, that's true. Energy storage might, but it can't yet. And it can't do it at a price that can come anywhere close to competing with natural gas plant or coal plant. So we have a mix. We have everything in our stuff. We have 40% of our power is coal. We have roughly the same amount of power in natural gas. We've got a chunk of hydro. We have our own hydro plants, and we buy hydro from the feds. And then we have a little bit of solar. And at one point we had some wind. We're always taking a look at the market and seeing if they can get it. But we have a mix. And it's driven by economics. It's also driven to some extent by the legislative thing. I mean, the voters passed a requirement for us to have 10%, and we have exceeded that. But we had to put some on, and that's fine. If the voters say they want that, that's fine. But they also have to realize that it costs them. And coal is still one of the cheapest. Now, I'm going to run back a couple of years. Our coal plant went offline for about a year when there was an accident, and we basically had a major fire, burned up the unit, and the power plant was offline for a while. We had to kick up the rates about 5%, and that was only the fuel costs of generating electricity, the cost between coal and natural gas. And so that's in there, and people don't really realize. I mean, there's a big political push here in Colorado Springs to close the plant and close it sooner rather than later. And right now we've targeted 2035, which I don't like. I'd like to not have a date on it and do it whenever the numbers say it's appropriate to do that. I suspect that would be out a little bit further. But right now the date's 2035, and we still have people pushing to say, "Hey, we can do 100%." Well, no, you can't. And you got municipalities. Pueblo has said we're going to go 100%. A couple other municipalities have said. I think Boulder said that, and of course the gubernatorial cabinet, Democratic candidate for governor, has talked about 100%. Well, we've looked at it. We've looked at it really closely, and in response to a number of people sending me, "Hey, these guys have got 2 cents per kilowatt hour." I put our team on, and we went through there and we ran the numbers, and I gave them a task. I said, "Show me how you can put on 100 megawatts and maintain that for 24 hours around the clock." Mm-hmm. And you can't do it on solar panels and wind, because you need so much battery storage to back it up that it's uneconomical. You can't make it work.
Well, one of the limitations of our power grid, which you've articulated, is you can't store excess power. The grid can only take as much power as is being drawn from it, which it's an engineering marvel in terms of American ingenuity, worldwide ingenuity. But that is a limitation in terms of, you end up producing a lot of wind at night. There's not a huge power demand at night, and so you end up with a surplus of energy, and the grid cannot handle that either. So the challenges that you're articulating are very real, and
oh yeah, and I think the key is energy storage, but it's not practical yet on utility scale. You can't store enough power to maintain the grid around the clock. You just can't do it. And if you did, here's kind of the equation, and it's somewhat simplified. But say you got a solar field out here, and you're going to run off your solar farm, and you generate enough power from your solar farm to run all your stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great, but if you're going to do that overnight, you have to have double that, because you've got to be taking that extra, putting in a battery, so that the battery runs it at night when the moon's up and the sun's down.
Interesting.
And that's what doesn't work. You've got, people say they've got utility scale storage, but when you actually dig in and look at the numbers, and I have, what they're talking about is essentially the same thing as you can go down to the store, you buy a universal power supply for your computer, so if the power hiccups, this thing will run your computer for half an hour before it shuts down. Well, that's kind of what you've got in these utility scale storage are only like an hour or less. It's really to stabilize the power. It's not to replace the power.
I understand.
And that's a reality. People are still working on that. there are exceptions to that. You can go out and buy. Elon Musk has got there's a great power wall, so you can spend $20,000 in your home, put a power storage wall, and you can do that. And you can rightfully say you're 100% renewable,
right,
and you can cut yourself from the grid. Well, that's great. But in most cases, the vast majority of individuals, companies, utilities who think they're going 100%, what they're really doing is they're banking financial credits during the day against the overnight production of the coal plant. And that's reality. They're really storing energy, not in terms of financial credits, and not really storing, power. And that's really how it works. And so, kind of part of that as well. The government's come out with his electrical vehicle plan, and I've derided that as being, the cars are really coal powered, because what happens is you drive around during the day, you come home at night, and you plug your car into the socket to recharge. Well, there aren't solar panels driving that. It's a coal plant or a natural gas plant is recharging the car for use the next day. So, that's kind of a misconception too. So when they said during the electrical vehicle plan would reduce emissions, no, it doesn't. It just moves the emissions from the car to the power plant.
It just changes them. We only have a couple of minutes left.
Changes.
We only have a couple of minutes left here, and I want to talk a little bit because in terms of we spent a great deal of time talking about utilities here, and that is part and parcel in terms of addressing growth, because if you have people moving into your area, they all need power.
Absolutely.
In terms of Colorado Springs, how has the growth been, and what have the challenges been in maybe a minute or so? You don't have a lot of runway here, but give me 60 seconds over Colorado Springs.
Colorado Springs is booming. We've got a lot of stuff going on. I also, in District 6, my district includes a couple of industrial parks, includes the airport, includes a vast open area, which is in the city limits, but still undeveloped. So we've got space for the city to grow for 100 years. And the challenge is to ensure that we have the power, the water, and all those other services, and be able at the same time to collect the taxes that provides the city services like police, fire, and roads and so forth. So city of Colorado Springs is booming. We've got very consistent growth year over year for the last several years, a lot of population growth. The housing prices are lower than Denver, so we're actually becoming, the northern part of Colorado Springs is the bedroom community for Denver commuters.
Wow.
Which is interesting. So we have a lot of people going up and down, and that adds to our issues in growth, because that's transportation issues of people, hitting the roads. So it's a lot of stuff. It's across all these issues: transportation, utilities, public safety, and everything. But we're doing it. We're laying out the plans. We've got the plans in place. We have the room to grow, both inside the city as well as growing in the across out into El Paso County, in the area we call Banning Loomis Ranch, which is a very large area, which is in city limits, largely 2/3 of my district, and it's still grassland. So we have a lot of room to grow yet.
Fantastic. Councilman Andy Pico, representing District 6 of Colorado Springs. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about the Colorado Springs City Council, how do they find you?
They can just hit the city webpage, and then you've got a section called Council, and it has all of our bios and contact points, or you can just shoot me an email, apico@springsgov.com.
Terrific. And check out this episode and all other episodes on vitalforcolorado.com. Check out the Learn tab, videos and podcasts. Thanks for joining us.